done, and we're ready to proceed here. Third and last paper of the session, as I said at the beginning, the first two presentations were on the research track. This one is on the practitioner's track, but it's also related to student supporting tools. As you can see in the title, we're talking about, and again, very cool titles in this session, rebooting the academic reporting, which I think is very interesting. So, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My name is Gus Everard. I'm a professor of physics at Michigan. I'm a colleague of Tim McKay's and a newly converted member of LAK. So I'm happy to be here, and I'd like to thank the organizers and also the reviewers of our paper for allowing us to speak. I'm here with Chris Tepelofs, co-author and co-conspirator for academic reporting tools. I do want to correct one thing Tim said this morning. You can do experimental cosmology. That's my job. I'm a computational cosmologist, and you can collide galaxies in silico. And the fidelity of these is becoming incredibly good. And it makes me wonder about the ability to model learning in simulations. You know, if we can simulate populations of students and organizations and put in rules and do agent-based, but anyway, I'm not here to discuss that today, but if you're interested in talking about that, I'd love to, or if there's already a community doing that, I'd love to speak with you about that, because that's kind of my job on the theory side of computational cosmology. But we're here to talk about academic reporting tools. This is a team effort. So first of all, I want to thank members of the team, who are back home in the Digital Innovation Greenhouse, which if you were at Tim's talk, you heard a little bit about today. Mike Wojon, Amy Hopkins-Hayes, Kyle Schultz, all regular staff in the Digital Innovation Greenhouse. And then I'll show you some work by student fellows. And also we have a steering committee, which is important because if you're going to introduce services campus-wide at an institution of the scale of Michigan, it's important to get buy-in as early as possible. So in terms of motivation for this is something, as Tim mentioned this morning, a service that I created back in 2006 with help from the College of Literature, Science, and Arts. I wanted to promote shared understanding of what's happening on campus in terms of just basic facts about the curriculum. How many students are taking a course? What types of students are taking a course? What do they go on to take? What are their academic performance in terms of grades earned? I mean, these are facts. We shouldn't be talking about alternative facts on campus. There should be just a record that we consult, and everyone should understand that there is an answer for these types of basic questions. And then empowering then, using that data to help decision makers on campus. And originally the service was stood up to help staff and faculty, and now the reboot is all about pointing out to students. That's why we're in this session. So Ann Arbor, maybe some of you have been there. It's a nice college town. This is the main campus. It's a couple of miles wide, and it's actually consists of 4 distinct campuses, ranging from the athletic campus down in this corner to the engineering campus up there, with the med school campus in between, and the main campus right here. And it's big, as you've heard from many of us, including 1,600 trees, because it is, of course, Ann Arbor. It's got 19 schools and colleges, been in place for about 150 years in terms of deans. We are serving 17 of the 19, with only the med school and School of Nursing not being part of academic reporting tools at the moment. And here's the volume of students over time in the last 200 years, and we're at about 44,000, as Tim mentioned this morning. So it's a big laboratory to do experiments in. It's such a big place that when you land on campus, even as a faculty member, as a staff member, as a student, getting oriented is hard, right? What do you know about the place? It's difficult. So what we learn a lot by stories. People talk to each other. So, you're a student, you've arrived, you talk to somebody else, they say, oh, no one ever gets an A in that class. Or, I heard that course is so much work. Or, my friend told me he's the most boring professor, right? And notice, my friend said, right? So now you're hearing stuff secondhand, and then you play the game of telephone, and all of a sudden the facts become alternative facts, right, through the telephone mechanism. So, how well informed are the stories that we tell on campus is the issue. So that's why we developed academic reporting tools in 2006, and here's the interface to help that's new, provided by Chris and the DIG team, to go in and search to get answers to basic facts. And the kind of underlying philosophy that we used is to refactor the existing service, which has this old school 2006 interface where a lot of drop-down menus, and each individual tool is a click-through, and you get one piece of information over here, then you got to come back out, click down, and get another piece of information. So the refactoring was to essentially think about decks of cards. So Pokemon, baseball cards, whatever. So one deck of cards for courses, summarizing statistical information about the course. One deck of cards for instructors. These are the services we've put out on campus now, and I'll talk about them in some detail. And we hope to then get decks of cards associated with majors and individual students. So here's what a page looks like for a course on campus in psychology. Introduction to Cognitive Psychology. This is the top third of the page, so you do have to do some scrolling, but there's a lot of things that you might be interested in if you're a student on campus about this course. One thing that happened in the focus in our paper is that we rolled out this service at the time, or we were developing this service at the time when an interesting deal was worked out between Central Student Government, the Senate Assembly, and the Provost's Office to release student evaluations of teaching back to students. And ART became the mechanism to do so. So what you see up here is the course description. This is information already provided by the course guide, so it's a bit redundant, but all of the rest of the information is new to students. Here are the summary of the 5 course-related questions in a visual way. So the bars tell you the fraction of students who either agreed or strongly agreed to, I had a strong desire to take this course, it advanced my understanding, the workload was hard, was heavy, the expectations were clearly stated, and it increased my interest in the subject. Okay. And then you get a list of instructors, and then on the next part of the page, you can see what the enrollment history of the course has been. Some courses have interesting patterns where they'll be big in one term and small in another, so if you like small classes, you take it that term. And it tells you the mix of students in terms of their academic level, also what the mixture is in terms of their degrees, at least declared at the time that we can get a hold of the data, and then what school or college they're part of. And in the bottom, it tells you something about the flow. So prior to taking this course, here's the list of courses that most students have taken. Here, listed by the fraction, increasing, decreasing fraction. Same thing for co-enrollment, and then post-enrollment. And each of these is clickable so you can navigate through to the next page associated with that course. Last fall, we introduced a new service called Instructor Info. So here's the card deck for instructors on campus. So every instructor has this visual summary of the 3, we moved to a set of 8 core questions, 5 course-related, 3 instructor-related. The instructor-related questions ask students to rate the preparedness, the clarity, and the degree of respect that instructors showed to students. And so here are visual summaries showing you strongly agree or agree to those questions. And then you also have a list of courses, so that if you liked taking a class with a given professor, you can now see what else do they teach, and maybe I'll think about putting that into my schedule for next semester, for example. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's going to give you a little bit of technical information about what's under the hood.
All right, so we didn't know who to expect in this session, so there's going to be a little bit of a mix here between sort of the policy aspect, the rollout aspect, and sort of what things look like under the hood. For those of you who care, we implemented this as a team using a Django framework, relies on MySQL as a back end, that we pull from the Oracle data warehouse that I'll talk about in a second. We deploy this using a modern container architecture. We currently deploy on premises, but we can certainly move this into the cloud. And we've actually had an indication from at least one other institution that they'd actually like to install this. So we're moving to a cloud-based implementation for this, and we can roll it out to them. We're working very closely with our Office of Technology Transfer to facilitate that. This is more or less what the architecture looks like when we deploy it. So when we start out, we actually pull from a series of different discrete different databases within our data warehouse. So our data warehouse at the University of Michigan, as Gus alluded to, has been, and I think Tim alluded to as well, has been in existence for over 20 years. It has historical records of basically everything any student or faculty member or staff member has done at the university. This information is blasted over hundreds of tables in 10s or 20s of databases. And we, for example, pull on student records. We pull on the college resources analysis table. We pull on human resources. There are secret databases that I didn't know about that apparently you have to know people who know about these databases. So if you're ever wondering where does this exist, it probably exists somewhere. You just have to know the right people to get there. There's a previous step here that represents the live data. So all of the data warehouse stuff is actually already a snapshot of the live data. We don't get access to the live data. We get access to this version of the live data. But we don't really like that stuff. And the reason we don't like it is this is a simple query that we need to execute to get at least a tiny bit of the data. So for that reason, we don't want to do that over and over again. So we actually pull that into one of our local databases, which is a nice, friendly, it supports a sort of pre-digested system for us, which we call our DIG data warehouse, Digital Innovation Greenhouse Data Warehouse. We use that to spin up all of our products. We currently have about 15 or 20 products that we develop in-house. This represents our core database technology. From that, we derive or augment, depending on what application we're talking about, an application-specific database. And that's what's actually fueling the data that provides the information for the two decks, at least, that Gus talked about, the course profile and instructor info. But it turns out that's not quite enough, right? We still need to pull in other information. I don't know if you remember what Gus showed a couple of slides ago here. This information here, for example, that this individual is a lecturer for, comes from not a database that's supported anywhere. I mean, not a database that we have ready access to. It's actually available through an API. So when we actually get to this part, we're actually pulling other information from a couple of other APIs to bring that all together to provide that end user interface back to that user. So that's the underlying technology. I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A period if anyone has specific questions about some of the challenges and successes that we've had in that.
Thanks, Chris. So let's talk a little bit more about process. As I mentioned, we stood up this original service in 2006, which was a dashboard aimed to faculty and staff. In 2015, Tim was PI of the Digital Innovation Greenhouse, and Art was one of the 3 initial applications to be supported. It took us a year. Well, we hired Chris and a couple of other developers, and a year later we released in March 26th, a year ago, we released to campus this new service. So you saw this morning. Here's the Digital Innovation Greenhouse in their lovely offices now on the 8th floor of Hatcher Library back home. And we are, DIG is all about being a local accelerator, right, to try to move you to scale. And I'll come to the end about how we want to get parked into our field outside of the greenhouse within the information technology division back home. So again, I mentioned what's important is to make sure that when you do a project like this, you have involvement across campus. So the first thing we did was to set up a steering team that has representatives from, say, the Registrar's Office, Student Life, Center for Research on Learning and Teaching, Central Student Government is involved, Central IT. We try to keep meetings relatively brief. Bi-weekly meetings for 1 hour, and we've been sustaining that for 2 years and have maintained a pretty good core of members who are really pushing this. All right, so we had some bumps in the road. With 19 schools and colleges, they're not always kept abreast of what's going on, so I presented to the Provost Academic Program Group about a year ago, and one unit dean basically got very defensive and said, how can you do this? It's my data. In fact, it's not your data. No individual dean owns your, just like we don't own the buildings. It's actually leased from the state. But these are the kind of misunderstandings that can arise. In the strange agreement that got worked out between SACUA and Central Student Government and the Provost's Office, the student evaluations of teaching can be seen by students, but they cannot be seen by the advisors of said students. So that's a weird situation, but because some faculty also serve as advisors, the main thought of SACUA, the Senate Assembly folks, was faculty really shouldn't see each other's evaluations because then they'll start slinging mud at each other. But it's odd to think that with 40,000 students on campus being able to see these evaluations, that if I wanted to sling mud at Tim, I could in 2 minutes go talk to a student and go see his student evaluation. So, and we tried to release grade information through this service initially and had to put that on hold while we dealt with this. So the Provost's Office was quite ready to make the move to release grades, but we'll hopefully get there soon enough. Let me talk to you a little bit about student engagement in terms of here's the usage of the service since we opened last year to last week. You can see here's when students are registering for classes for fall term. They do that next week, basically, when we get back. Here's students going through orientation, freshmen going through orientation over the summer. Here's the first week of class. Here's registering for winter term classes in fall. Here's the first week of winter term, and then we're coming up again for registering for classes now. And so these numbers are a little bit overinflated because people have multiple devices, and but roughly 10,000, 12,000 students have used the service since we opened it up. Some comments from students that we have on our website. For example, Noah Bettman, class size and enrollment data have been particularly valuable to me when crafting a schedule. And I think that is, for students, there's a lot of stress, right, associated with I have 5 slots, maybe 4 slots or 6 slots to fill in for next semester, and I have how many thousands of courses potentially to choose from. Of course, constraints because of majors, you might have only 2 or 3 slots available with any flexibility, but that still gives you a lot of flexibility how to fill those slots. So that's what we hope to do, is give students more information about how to help them choose wisely. Student engagement in terms of the helping in design and development of the tool. Dana Dembski is a UX student fellow working with our lead design guy, Mike Wojan, back home. She did this nice logo for us, as well as many of the legends that we have here on our webpage. And again, that's not quite free, but it's as close to free as you can get for when you work with students. It's nice. And then we also have students involved in doing data analysis. And let me just show you a little bit of results from that. So here, for example, is in the College of Literature, Science, and Arts, answers over the past 6 years. How many students agreed or strongly agreed to, I had a great desire to take this course, and I learned a lot. So this is, I learned a great deal is this one. I had a strong desire to take this course. And what you see is in the natural sciences, students tend to learn about as much, right? But they really don't want to take it. How might we change that attitude? What would happen if we were able to move this line up? Would that line go up? There's strong correlations between these responses that we get from students. So anyway, this is the kind of information that is useful for program directors and anyone interested in improving the curriculum. So next steps, I just have a couple of slides to finish up. There's a lot to do. One thing is that now that we've engaged students, so we have 10 or 12,000 students who have engaged with the service already, and coming up with this next couple of weeks, there'll be a few thousand more. So let's see what they're doing on the service. How do we compare as they wander through, looking at courses, what do they actually end up choosing to take, and then we can follow up with them in a survey to find out why. We'd like to develop cards for majors that potentially could connect to career outcomes. And that would be really cool. And I've spoken with a number of you here about that. Personalization and the idea of building out views for students to allow themselves to build out views of their progress through the curriculum, just for themselves initially, but that might be transferred into the transcript of the future as they graduate. And then dig deeper functionality. I just have one slide on this. The ability for faculty, staff, administrators to look at performance information, look at grades achieved, and disaggregate by student attributes. And then, we need to move out of the greenhouse at some point. We need to go out in the field and get planted for real. So the dig deeper functionality is something that we had thought we would release last year, and it got sidelined a little bit because essentially and Tim showed this morning, you'll notice that this view allows you can come in here and click something like sophomore, and you'll see the grade distribution for sophomores, right? But notice that we have a gender box and we have an ethnicity box. When General Counsel came through to look at this, they basically said, yeah, everything else is fine, but these are protected classes and you shan't allow